Hi, this is April 1st, and I'm Becca Chavez, and welcome to Bibliophilia. Today, we're discussing Wuthering Heights. Hi, today we're here with Kat Humphries. Hi, Kat.
Hi, excited to be here today.
Hey, and we're going to talk about Wuthering Heights, which is one of my favorite books, and apparently one of your favorite books, too.
Possibly my all-time favorite book, so.
So as always, we are sponsored by, as always, it's been like 3 episodes, but we're sponsored by Sexy Pizza. And what's really cool is that they have pizzas that are like charity pizzas.
Yes.
And $1 from these pizzas goes to organizations, and one of the organizations you sit on the board of, correct?
I do. Well, I'm actually no longer on the board for SSDP, but I did serve on it for 2 years, so I'm all about the SSD pizza from Sexy Pizza.
So if you want pizza tonight, that's the one you should get.
Definitely. It's delicious. It's white and spinach. It's
yeah,
really
I know,
good.
because I saw you once with it, and you were very attracted to that pizza.
Super delicious.
Yeah. And you're also doing a 5K, correct?
Yeah, at the end of May, I'm doing a 5K called Run for the Door. So it's to raise money for homelessness and helping people transition into jobs and temporary housing and get on their feet. So I'm excited for that because I'm not really a runner.
It's okay. I think 5K is like, I think it's hard because I don't run that much.
Right, I can't run like 5 minutes, so that's why I'm training for it.
Marathoners are like, 5K, that's pathetic.
I know. My sister just ran a half marathon, and I kind of blew my mind. So
it's crazy.
Yeah. I was like, wow, I should start being an adult and exercising.
So I feel like half marathons are like the length of Colfax, is my understanding. Are they like the same length? And then, because people have those half marathon stickers on their car, and I'm like, oh, it's about Colfax Avenue. And then it's like, no, it's not. It's about...
That's not the same thing.
Yeah, not at all. So anyway, half marathons and Colfax Avenue, different things. That's the lesson. But we are going to put up a link on the Facebook page. It's actually scheduled, so it's just going to go up there. So if you're interested in sponsoring Kat for...
Run for the Door 5K.
Run for the Door 5K. It's going to be up on the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Bibliophilia podcast.
Awesome.
And yeah, now that we're done with that, we can talk about the book. Do you want to do we have 2-minute plots here. So we'd go over the plot in 2 minutes, which is kind of interesting because it's a little convoluted with Wuthering Heights because there's different generations.
Right. It gets a little confusing.
But do you want to try?
Yeah, sure.
I can put on a timer and we'll try a 2-minute plot.
Yes,
All
I'm
right.
into it.
Ready? Go.
Okay, so the book starts off with Lockwood coming to Thrushcross Grange, and he begins as the original narrator for the story, but ends up not being the narrator for the majority of the story. He's kind of... Wow, when you start reading, it's so confusing what's going on because Lockwood just has no clue. He starts interpreting all these really, really complicated interpersonal relationships and misappropriating them and assuming different weird things. And so it's kind of confusing at the beginning. But then we kind of start to have the past revealed to us, have the depth of the relationship between Catherine and Heathcliff, which is above Romeo and Juliet in my books. Guess it depends on how you like your star-crossed lovers, but
Dead at the end of the book.
Dead at the end of the book, so spoilers. So it kind of gets into the background behind Heathcliff. He's kind of an orphan. He's described as a gypsy. He's brought to this family who's well-to-do, living at Wuthering Heights, an estate kind of cut off from every other part of humanity. And then it kind of chronicles their whole life. It chronicles the relationship that develops between Catherine and Heathcliff, what happens to Catherine as she kind of becomes more cultured, meets the Linton family at Thrushcross Grange, how that kind of her relationships progress, particularly with Edgar. I was about to say, what's his face? Edgar. And kind of the real conflict between Edgar and Heathcliff and deciding who she's in love with and how she'll ever carry on without one or the other, because one offers true love, supposedly, and the other offers status and and such. And so then it even progresses into their children, etc. Where are we at?
We're at like 2 minutes and 4 seconds.
Okay, well, there's like way more to the story than this. But I'm kind of verbose.
So let's start with these narrators because you said, of course, that Lockwood doesn't know and he's just making assumptions about what's happening at the Grange. And I also think he's a jerk.
Yeah, no, totally. He expects just to be treated so highly, and he's super disappointed by everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a weird book because there are 2 unreliable narrators because I don't think either of the narrators are very nice people.
No, not at all.
Lockwood starts the book by saying he's such a misanthrope and he's so happy to be in the moors because no one will bother him. And the first thing he does is go and bother Heathcliff.
Right. And he has such high expectations and stuff. And, he's like, I don't know. He really offends them without realizing how much he's offending them.
He steals a lantern and runs off in
right,
the middle of the night.
That's a problem.
Yeah. Like, you shouldn't steal things from people if you're at their house. And they're like, basically, what happens is there's a lot of snow and you shouldn't be going out in the moors in the snow. And they're basically all like making fun of him, kind of like,
you're definitely going to die.
Yeah. Right. And he's like, oh, I'm leaving. And he runs off like a child and takes the lantern and then...
And fails.
Yeah.
Fails miserably.
And also another thing I found weird was so Catherine and Heathcliff, spoiler alert, they don't end up together. She marries Edgar, and they have a child, and the child, Kathy.
Very original.
Yeah. They all name their kids after themselves. Kathy ends up living at Wuthering Heights, and she's living there at the time Lockwood shows up. And one of the things I thought was so interesting about Lockwood was that he's like, oh, yeah, I could totally marry her. Like, she's not, her opinion isn't brought into it at all. It's all about him.
No, totally. And something I found very disturbing is the interaction between Lockwood and Catherine's ghost in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
If you think about it, it's kind of like really, really messed up. He's interacting with this ghost. He gets really scared by it. And then he starts, like, cutting its arms.
Yeah, it's described kind of like killing the ghost.
Killing the ghost by slitting its wrists.
Kill a ghost.
Yeah. It's disturbing.
It's very weird.
It's like, why is that what you assumed would be good for this situation?
To kill the ghost in that way. It's just...
It's
And that's our first introduction to the ghost, and I think probably the first time the ghost really shows up.
Yeah.
Heathcliff gets a bit emotional afterwards.
Right, when he finds Lockwood in there.
And figures out that there was a ghost, too.
Because he feels Catherine all the time.
Yeah.
He feels her presence, so...
But I don't think... I mean, it does come back up in the very end that he's definitely seen her.
Right.
And so... And then he's at peace because he's seen her. But at the beginning, he's kind of tormented a lot. And the reason he's tormented is explained by Nellie, who is also very unreliable.
Very unreliable. Nellie is all about Nellie.
She's like the worst servant in the history of the world.
Right.
So Nellie is a servant who was born at the same time as Catherine's older brother, Hindley. So they were kind of raised together. But Nellie has like no idea of the separation between servant class and not servant class.
Yeah, it's not there for her.
Yeah, and it's very odd because she continuously puts Heathcliff in his place, it seems.
Right. Yeah, no, she casts him off, like, casts him to the kitchen, like, don't come out.
Yeah.
You must be banned.
She hates Joseph, the other servant is Joseph.
To be fair.
Joseph kind of
sucks. I'm always trying to read what Joseph is saying, and I say it out loud, and I read it again, and I'm just like, what is this saying?
Joseph is one that you need a version of the book with notes in it.
Clearly. That would have been really helpful because I read it over and over and I can get the gist of what he's saying, but some words I just have no idea what they're trying to get across.
Yeah, and I think that's something, too, that's very odd, but I feel like if we went to the moors, there would be people that we wouldn't, even though we all speak English.
Oh, totally.
It's like how they put subtitles on like Train Spotting so that you know what they're saying.
So you have any idea, exactly.
Yeah, because otherwise you'd just be so lost in their Scottish accents. But Nellie is, I think of Nellie as the catalyst, really. Like, if it weren't for her, everything would have continued on just fine. But because of her, Catherine died.
Right.
In this, well, I mean,
Well,
things wouldn't have been fine, but
yeah, no, I agree. And Nellie is just all about, I mean, she's all about personal gain. She does so many things. She lies so many times to cover things up. She, I mean, openly admits, I think on multiple occasions, that she doesn't like Catherine.
Or Heathcliff.
Or, well, yeah, sure.
She
Definitely
despises
not
him.
Heathcliff, right. And she just thinks Catherine's spoiled and kind of a terrible person, which she has an argument for. But at the same time, you kind of have to wonder how biased her perspective is, and really...
Especially since she's the one telling the story.
Right.
And she clearly despises these people.
Well, yeah.
So let's talk about them for a second. Catherine and Heathcliff. Heathcliff was brought into the house as a child. And Catherine, at first she didn't like him, and then she takes a liking to him, and they become bosom buddies as children.
Best buds.
Best buds. But they both kind of have this similar high passion that is... They're all running around on the fields all the time.
Yeah, they're untamable. There's they just...
Yeah, they just go where they want to, and they are always together.
Which is particularly interesting considering the Victorian era that it's kind of like taking place during. It's not like children were running free amongst the moors, particularly of wealthy families.
Yeah.
That's definitely out of ordinary for the
and
time
I actually
period.
think this might be... It's weird because it was written in the Victorian period, but I think it was set before.
Really? So it's
Yeah.
even pre. So even
Yeah,
more
so
so.
it's
Yeah.
even more so they would be...
Right.
They should be contained, and they're not, and that's an interesting aspect of it. Because then when they do meet the Lintons, they went to spy.
Right.
Little jerks.
They're
like
yeah.
little kids that you wouldn't want in your neighborhood.
No, they're terrible.
They're awful. They
They're
never go. They run away from church. They
get lost. They play games you can't trust. No, but yeah, I mean they're peeping toms. They're just into everybody's business.
And so they go to the house, and the dogs get set on them when noises start outside, and one of the dogs attacks Catherine. And she's taken in, and she spends like 5 weeks with the Lintons, and that's when everything changes.
Right, the whole thing flips. So now, Catherine has been civilized at Thrushcross Grange because that's really where people go to become civilized folk.
I don't think she really becomes civilized.
No, I think it's more of an outwards appearance thing. I think at heart she's still her crazy, wild, Wuthering Heights self, and she still cares for Heathcliff, but it's different. And I think when she's there, they kind of teach her what it means to be a lady and teaches her, how to be a little bit more respectable.
Yeah, as opposed to just running around wild with your buddy. So as an adult, when she grows into an adult, and at one point, this is where the conflict comes in, everyone listening. So at one point, she as an adult, Edgar Linton proposes to her, and she is conflicted about, she accepts, but she's conflicted about whether or not she should have accepted. And so she goes and talks to Nellie, who you probably shouldn't ask for advice on those things from.
No, not the most wise person.
And this is where we get to the central conflict of the book, which is that Linton represents something for her, and Heathcliff represents something completely different. And she ultimately chooses Linton, which is fancy and nice things, with the idea that she can lift Heathcliff up from this position.
Yeah, she doesn't see her relationship really changing with Heathcliff despite marrying Edgar.
Yeah. So with Edgar, like, this choice she makes of love versus money and respectability, where do these choices lead to, and what does that mean ultimately for her, do you think?
It ruins everything. She clearly makes the wrong choice. Who's to say Heathcliff would have been the right choice? But between the two, I think it's a timeless type of thing. This could happen at any time in history. She has to choose between someone she loves, someone she has a very, very deep connection with, or someone who loves her but she's not really that interested in. But he has a lot of money.
Do you think Edgar loves her?
I think Edgar cares for Catherine. You disagree?
I don't think he loves anybody. I think he's cold, and I hate Edgar.
Edgar's terrible.
I think he's the worst character in the book, honestly.
Wow, really the worst? There are a lot of terrible characters in this book.
This book is, like, for a while there, one thing about Wuthering Heights is every time I read it, I get something else out of it. But, like, the second and third time I read it, I was like, oh, this book is just horrible. People being terrible to one another. But it's not. I think Edgar, like, wins the cake, wins the prize, wins the terrible person prize.
It's possible.
I think he's the worst. So I don't think he really loves her. I don't think he's a good person. Do you?
No. I guess that doesn't really change her decision, though. It's really more about the one you want to be with, or the one that's going to give you the stuff that you want to have.
It's about the status for her.
Yeah, it really is. And I feel like that status exists with Edgar, and that's really all she's looking for. She's not really looking for any type of deeper relationship with him.
Well, not with him.
No, yeah, not with Edgar. She definitely has that going with Heathcliff, on and off, because they're so...
Yeah, and Heathcliff hears the conversation that she has with Nellie, where she basically is like, Heathcliff will never accomplish anything.
It would degrade me to be with him. Yeah.
Which is pretty mean.
That's a pretty harsh thing to say.
But actually, and this comes to another point, there's an issue with Heathcliff that's never really... I mean, it's addressed quite a bit in the book. They continuously talk about it. When he shows up, they're like, oh, he's a gypsy child. And then at one point, Nellie says that he might be like a prince's son or something, like a Chinese prince's son. Like, he's Asian. He's not a white guy. And so they're very aggressive towards him. And I mean, there's a lot of, like, little subtle things that they do. And one of them is that Heathcliff knows that he's set apart from them. And they keep talking about how fair and nice the Lintons are. So they're basically like the whitest people you've ever met.
Whitest of the white.
Yeah. And Heathcliff is not that. And at one point he gets very upset and says that he wishes he was as fair as Edgar, and he wished he had as much chance to make as much money as him. And the fact those two are so wrapped up, I think that speaks a lot to, like, how people initially react to Heathcliff. Because one thing I've noticed when I read this book is that Edgar never once in the entire book, and this is why I hate him so much, he never once says a single nice thing to Heathcliff.
Yeah, no, definitely not. To be fair, Heathcliff's a little aggressive towards Edgar, but obviously with reason.
Yeah, I mean, the guy stole his girlfriend.
The absolute love of his life, soulmate forever and ever.
And for no reason, just because he could. And yeah, so Heathcliff runs off and comes back 3 years later, but it's like, and I love that it's like 2 months too late or something like that. Like, he shows up 3 years later, and it's like, you just missed the boat on that one.
It's like 6 weeks after.
Yeah, after she got married. So if only he'd had Facebook and it had been like, just engaged, wedding Tuesday.
Tweeted at her or something.
Yeah, but instead he's off, and they're never very clear about how he makes his money, but he made like a crap load of money.
Right. But that doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter that he's super rich.
Well, okay, so I think that if he had come back, 6 weeks earlier and been like, hi, super rich, that would have changed things a bit. Maybe.
I don't know, though, I think it kind of matters. Although, again, it's maybe intentionally vague as to how he came across his fortune. But, I mean, I think that matters. I think it matters to people in that era where people came from. It's not just about their money. It's about their name. It's about their lineage. It's about that type of status. And while it's new money versus old money, and part of that kind of comes from the status that Edgar has, and I think that kind of influences things. I don't know that it would have changed things with Heathcliff. I mean, probably, because Catherine's like...
Yeah.
But the whole time, Heathcliff is always just, like, scheming about how to, like, control the estate and, like, all of that stuff. So, I don't know.
I don't know if Heathcliff... Okay, so a lot of what Nellie says, Nellie's like, oh, Heathcliff's hell-bent on revenge. But because so Catherine's father is the one who brings Heathcliff to the house. And he dies when they're still pretty young. And after he dies, then Hindley, Catherine's brother, takes over and treats Heathcliff like a servant. And that's Nellie's like, oh, Heathcliff's hell-bent on getting revenge for being treated like a servant. But I don't there just aren't a lot of times where Heathcliff's like, I mean, there's so many times where Heathcliff is like, yeah, now I could totally get my revenge right now. And instead he's like, no, I'm just going to hold off on this one. Like,
Also,
he's like a bad supervillain.
Is Hindley really that terrible to Heathcliff in the beginning? It kind of seems like Heathcliff's a big old jerk to Hindley.
Yeah, like
know what
right
I
at the
mean?
very beginning, I would say that Heathcliff is a bit of a jerk, but Hindley kind of, after his dad dies, Hindley kind of takes it to a whole new level.
Right, yeah, he definitely. But I feel like that's kind of because Heathcliff poked him the whole time, you know? I don't know that it would have been as bad. I mean, obviously the father favored Heathcliff. That made Hindley unhappy. But at the same time, I mean, Heathcliff would be like, oh, I'm going to tell your dad that you did this and like so that you fall out of favor.
But he was like, I'm going to tell your dad that you beat me.
Right.
Like, if
it was
he's
like
getting beaten,
yeah, I
maybe
don't
he shouldn't have done that.
I don't know. But I thought there were like times when he hadn't done it and he was like, I don't know. It just seemed like he was trying to.
Yeah. He was a little provocative.
A
for
bit.
Sure.
I don't know.
But then I think, I mean, Hindley kind of. So Hindley has this wife who dies shortly after giving birth to a child. And then Hindley just, in the best way possible, is just like, screw everything. I'm just going to be a drunk for the rest of my life.
I'm just going to drink myself to death.
And that kind of makes everything a lot worse for Heathcliff because it just allows for more abuse to go in one direction, especially because Hindley has all the power at that time. He has all the money. And so, I mean, there's a lot of things you could do, but I think one thing that Heathcliff could have done that would have been, if he was really hell-bent on this revenge, first of all, sticking around and just enabling Hindley to drink himself to death would have been step one. But he doesn't. He goes off to make a fortune. And then he comes back with all this money, and Hindley's like really into gambling, so he borrows money from Heathcliff to the point where the house is mortgaged to Heathcliff.
He's in massive debt to Heathcliff.
Yeah, and Heathcliff never once is like, okay, I'm calling this in.
Right, never.
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of compassion there.
Sure.
That, I mean, this
well,
is
or he's in it for the long game. Like, he's just trying to see how much he can get and to see how much, you know, because it's all about getting those properties and, like, controlling them. And I feel like that's kind of the impetus behind all of the relationships with the kids and, you know, all that stuff just to get so that Heathcliff can end up controlling that stuff because I guess it's such a large piece of his history, you know, and maybe if he can acquire the status that he once never had, he could be the person that Catherine would have wanted. But
to keep, I mean, she dies and he keeps going.
Because he's crazy.
I don't think he's crazy. I have a lot of sympathy for Heathcliff. I feel a lot of feelings for him. And, here's the thing. Let's play Date, Marry, Kill.
Okay.
Heathcliff, Edgar, and Hindley.
Oh, wow.
Good choices, huh?
Right? Okay, so definitely gonna marry Heathcliff.
See?
I don't think there's any question about that. You know, I guess you just have to date Hindley because, I mean, what's your other option but to kill Edgar? Because, wow, he's the worst.
I think he's the worst.
No, I totally agree with that assessment. He's horrible.
Let's talk about terrible things that Edgar does. So beyond simply never saying a nice thing to Heathcliff, he does eventually kick Heathcliff out of the house.
Right.
I mean, when Catherine's sick, he's not really there, but that's partly because Nellie is like, oh, she's just faking it.
Yeah.
And then, so that's part of it. He does kind of, one thing that I found was really weird was that, so Catherine gives birth and dies shortly after giving birth.
Sure.
And so instead of ever being like, yay, my daughter was born this day, instead he just spends her whole birthday like sad and morose, like for years, for 17 years, because he's there for that's kind of a dick move.
It's kind of a dick move. Also, like, then once Kathy is born, he's like crazy protective. Like, she doesn't leave the property for like 13 years.
Yeah. It's very weird.
Yeah, and then he like tries to kind of like have his child's life play out in the way that he really wants to control it, and it's kind of it's kind of uncomfortable.
He lies to her.
Right.
Like, she finds out that Wuthering Heights exists, and he's like, oh, you can never go over there because Heathcliff just doesn't like me, and I don't know why. And it's like, well, you kind of know why.
Can't imagine why.
He can't figure it out. He's just such a jerk. And then he kidnaps Heathcliff's kid.
Right.
Because Heathcliff marries Edgar's sister, Isabella.
Which was kind of a dick move for Heathcliff.
It was, because he knew he was never going to love her.
No, never. And Isabella was sort of into him, too, really. I mean, she was kind of infatuated with him for a little while.
I think she's just a little spoiled kid. Like,
Yeah,
and he kind of took advantage of it. So.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that she loved him, but I would say that for a while she was fascinated and interested in him.
Yeah.
And then she realized he is pure evil.
How much of that do you think was because he was into someone else?
Yeah,
you know when someone shows
that
up?
kind of poisons the relationship.
Yeah. You know, if there's like a guy that you're into and he's like into someone else and you're like, I like him double hard now, like for no reason. And
yeah, that's the universe just saying.
Yeah. And when you're like a 16-year-old girl, as Isabella is, it's not like that's gonna be that's like your option. That's like your only option.
It's not gonna end well.
Yeah. So they have a child that after Isabella dies, because she marries him and then she runs off at probably the worst possible time to abandon a person.
Right. Yeah. No.
So Catherine has just died. Heathcliff's really upset. And Isabella's like, this is a good time to antagonize my very angry husband.
Seems like a good plan.
Yeah. And then she runs away because he was just really mad that, she was being so terrible. And she has a baby, and then Edgar kidnaps the kid and brings him to the house. And Heathcliff, of course, finds out.
Right.
And goes to get his kid. But then Edgar's like, oh, what a cruel person for doing that. So that's pretty terrible.
And then the kids start becoming more of the plot line.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
The kids are fun. So there's three kids. Kathy, Linton, and Hareton. Hareton is Hindley's kid.
Right.
Linton is Heathcliff's kid. Heathcliff doesn't have a last name, by the way. It's like Heathcliff.
It's Heathcliff.
Yeah, they just call him Heathcliff. And then so Linton Heathcliff.
And that just gets downright confusing.
It is. Why they all had to name their kids after themselves.
Kathy, Linton. Why are you doing that? There's so many names.
Yeah, so there's Hareton Earnshaw. The Earnshaws, the Lintons, and then Heathcliff, and then Linton Heathcliff, and then... There's so many names, but they're all like the same name.
Yeah, then it's like Catherine Earnshaw, Catherine Linton, Catherine Heathcliff.
Yeah, she does become Catherine Heathcliff. So, yeah. So part of Heathcliff's plan to apparently destroy everything, and this is the part that really gets me that I don't understand. So Heathcliff was really fortunate that he got an heir, and it's discussed a couple times in the book how Kathy's not going to be the heir to Thrushcross Grange because she's a woman, and it's the laws of primogeniture have been put in place, and it's entailed off to the son, always the male. Mm-hmm. And it just so happens that the male is Heathcliff's child. So he has the Grange. Basically, that's it. It's his. And this is the part where I don't think, when we look at Heathcliff as a revenge tale, it doesn't make any sense for him to then pressure Catherine and Linton to get married because he already has all. If you really... Okay, if I were Heathcliff, diabolical master of the universe, who wanted to get revenge on people, I'd call in the mortgage on Hindley.
Totally.
That's done. Then you own Wuthering Heights. And then, because by chance, you just happen to have knocked up Linton's sister, Edgar Linton's sister, that's it. All you have to do is bring the kid back to your place and keep him alive longer than Edgar. And then after the kid dies... Because, Linton's really weak. That should be...
Well, would there be some sort of... So if Kathy had a son, though, would he become the new heir? Is that maybe why he wanted to ensure that she was married to Linton? So that...
Well, I feel like because Edgar was so close to... Edgar was a weakling. Mm-hmm. And I feel like because he was so close to death, that wouldn't it hop over to Linton before?
You would think, but because Linton is so sickly and could die at any minute. Right? It gets kind of convoluted in
Linton
there.
is the most pathetic character.
Linton is the... Okay, if there's a second worst to
but
Edgar...
I feel like Edgar's purposely the worst.
That's true.
Linton's who's just raised by a terrible human being.
That's true. He's also just like very, very sickly and incapable of doing literally anything.
And how much is he complicit in the manipulation that goes on to get little Kathy to marry him? Because I don't feel like it's all...
No.
I mean, he does a lot of crying, like, oh, my father will beat me, but you never actually really see Heathcliff beat Linton.
No, you really don't. And it's kind of left up to the imagination, I feel like, more than anything. It's like, oh, like, Heathcliff, like, taught him a lesson, and you're just like, so what does that mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, this is a sickly child. Is he, like, literally beating this child? Is, like, what's going on here?
Yeah, and he does, like, early in the not early in the book, because like half of it's taken up with him obsessing over Catherine, but
accurate.
Early in like just the discovery that Linton exists, Heathcliff is like, Heathcliff continuously asks about Linton, which I think is a really he won't go bother Isabella because he doesn't like her, but
no, she's terrible.
She's kind of mean.
Kind of prissy.
It's just, she makes bad choices. If she were my child, I'd be like, I'm continuously disappointed in you and your life choices. But he doesn't go see her, but he does ask about Linton constantly, apparently. Like, whenever he sees Nellie in the fields, he asks about Linton in the fields in Gimmerton, the close-by town. Yes, so he does care about him, and he gets really excited. Like, you can see how excited he is when Linton first shows up, and then he, like, realizes. What I think is fun is when you watch that scene where he arrives, they kind of realize how much he sucks, and they're like, oh, this isn't going to go well for us. And I think that really speaks to the writing. So, how much would the upbringing of these kids affect how they're interacting with each other? Especially, I'd say Hareton is the one who was brought up in the most interesting way. Do you have any opinions about how Heathcliff decided to raise Hareton?
Yeah, well, it's almost as if he's kind of... It's weird because like the whole time Kathy is obsessing over Linton, and then there's Hareton here, and she's just making fun of him and really kind of torturing him in a lot of different ways by just kind of by really just hurting his feelings. And I think the way Heathcliff treats him doesn't help.
Yeah.
But overall, I think their upbringings completely alter the story.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no other way to answer that, but because of the way that they're brought up, they see the world in different ways. I mean, Kathy sees it as a more, well, it's kind of hard to say, but I guess she's had a more privileged life. And Linton seems to be the obvious choice because of that, which is like so bizarre to me. The whole time I'm like, why aren't you interested in hair? Like, why? But then eventually...
Yeah. Hareton's apparently really good looking is one thing.
Right.
Yeah. Linton is kind of skinny and like, okay, so like...
A pale baby.
Yeah, so, and this is really interesting. I think it's just that... obviously, Emily Bronte didn't know a lot about genetics because she continuously describes Heathcliff as dark, and like he's got dark skin and he's got dark hair that's always in his face, and he's mysterious, and they're constantly like talking about how he's an other, but then he has like Edgar and Isabella are super white, and then
like the whitest of children. It doesn't make any sense.
And then Linton is like snow. He's just the whitest kid that ever existed. But yeah, so he's not I mean, he's like appealing in this weird way because they talk about how he has like golden locks, and that's lovely, right?
I suppose.
Golden, curly, flaxen hair.
See, that's just really not my type.
No.
So I'm having a hard time seeing it. But,
I just get this image of, like, like a bird, kind of like a baby bird.
Yeah,
when
I
Lincoln's
just feel like
described.
he's like helpless.
At one point, they're over at his house. This is like the second time they've ever seen him, and he falls off his chair, and I laugh like every time. I know you're not supposed to laugh at it because it's sad that he's so sickly, but he just like falls off and is like, I can't get up, and Nellie's like, we have to leave.
We're gonna have to go.
Yeah, oh poor Linton. He'll never accomplish anything because he dies at 18.
Right,
so.
because he dies. Womp womp.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Everybody dies at the end of this book. So, we got some big questions. We always like to do big questions. First of all, how much do you think microaggressions are to blame for the way that Heathcliff interacts with people? Do you think microaggressions are to blame for it? People are kind of nasty towards him, but I think so. What did you think?
I think that's absolutely a major thing that impacts Heathcliff. I mean, his entire childhood is microaggressions committed against him. I mean, you know what I mean? I guess he has a friend in Catherine. Catherine.
Yeah. Well, they do say that they refer to Catherine Earnshaw as Catherine, and then they call Catherine Linton Kathy all the time.
Baby Kathy. Right. But, you know, he's discriminated against. And the first time, I will say, I read this book, and I suppose it was probably like maybe the 10th or 11th grade. And I was in South Carolina, and we did not at all address the fact that Heathcliff was a gypsy or of another race or anything like that, othered in any real considerable way. And so when I reread this book, I was like, what? How did we not talk about this? Like, people completely, disregarded him and really put him to the side. And, you know, at times they made him work in the fields. At times they never, ever gave him a real opportunity, although the father, Mr. Earnshaw, really, really cared for Heathcliff. So it's like kind of this weird type of thing because, you know, he really did have the advantage that he was, you know, picked up. He was brought into this house. He was cared for, but that really kind of caused him to be the really super just bitter person that he grew up to be afterwards because all of that hatred towards him ended up just like making him completely jaded and hating the whole world, and everybody that he came into contact with was like 4 people. So
well, and he goes off for those 3 years, but we don't know who he comes in contact with. It's a weird thing, but yeah, you're right. And I think that the racial thing, because I discussed it too in college, and we did kind of brush on it a bit, but I think there's a couple things in play. First of all, we used to define whiteness differently. I think. So, there's this book, How the Irish Became White, which is about how, you know, they were discriminated against. And then they figured out how to become white as, like, we know it today. So different definitions of whiteness, I think, lead to people thinking that Heathcliff is what? And the way he's described, too, they're never like, he is definitely Asian. So, no one's like... It's kind
of up in the air.
Yeah.
Because you said Asian, I said, oh, okay, I could totally see that. But in my mind, he's just not white. Yeah.
And there's the latest movie, the Andrea Arnold movie, has him played by a black man, but a black actor, but he's not black either. Like,
no, he's not.
The other movies are all like... just white guys with hair that's dyed black, which I think is like the worst excuse.
I can say, you know, I've never actually seen a movie.
You've never seen a movie?
No.
Okay, I think, well, actually, I guess to be fair, the only one I've ever seen is the Andrea Arnold one.
But the more recent one?
Yeah.
I've read about it. People are like, oh, I love that movie. And I was like, what are you talking about?
I saw it at the Esquire, so like when it was all
cool.
Indian came out.
Oh, nice.
2 years. It took 2 years for it to come out in Esquire, so... You know, and it was there for like a week.
No, when it comes to videos about Wuthering Heights, I'm pretty exclusively into Kate Bush, so...
Okay, cool. Oh, yeah, that's right. Like, I was going to watch that video. I tried watching it once, and then I found it really... Her voice was like...
Grating?
Yeah,
horrible.
I don't know, so...
I think it's so funny, though.
I've never seen it. I do see GIFs of it.
Yeah, all the time.
So, but always played by like a white guy, and I think that leads to some confusion.
It does, because it doesn't quite make sense. You know, he's an outsider, but why does everyone hate him so much? And you don't realize it until maybe you're looking back on it and really think about what is the deal here? What's going on? Why is this man considered pure evil when, you know, he might be made into that later in the book? He might have been made into someone, I wouldn't say pure evil, but obviously someone that has been treated unfairly his whole life, and I think that plays a huge deal in it. But as you say, there are parts where Heathcliff shows compassion still.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that he's capable of overcoming it to some extent, but I think it really kind of rules over his world.
And obviously, in the end, he just picks like the most compassionate choice.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, one of the things I noticed on this reading was in the very beginning when Lockwood first shows up, he's like, "Oh, but Heathcliff doesn't look like he belongs." But then Kathy is like really, really mean.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, my sweet angel is such a beacon of light. I couldn't believe she said such harsh words." And it's like, dude, you have to start seeing people for what they are. But he's blinded by like the outside appearance of people, and I think that obviously that's affected Heathcliff throughout his whole life and made him into the person that he is. Okay, and then our other big question is, how can we define love when society and economics come into play? Because obviously, at the time that this was written, especially in the time that this was set, I mean, it's set, I think that...
1801?
Yeah.
I want to say.
Let me see, because at the very end, he's like, "Oh, yeah, then I went back," and it's actually got an actual date there.
Okay.
So, no, it doesn't. Never mind, everybody. I was wrong. It does somewhere. I know there are dates in here somewhere. 1801. Yeah, 1801. I've just returned from a visit to my landlord. That's how it starts.
Yeah.
But it's set like 20 years before that, really, and that's even before. That's very gothic. That's even before Jane Austen was doing her whole Mr. Darcy and 10,000 Pounds thing.
Yeah.
Like, so there's a lot of pressure to kind of marry well, and Kathy doesn't have any money. I mean,
right. You know, I think of Catherine.
Catherine.
I think of Catherine as a really kind of selfish character, but at the same time, you know, you kind of have to cut her a little bit of slack when thinking about the world that she's living in, because really, you know, marrying the person you're in love with, going off and doing that's all grand. But you kind of have to think about survival and your children and whether or not they're going to be able to flourish and survive. And at the time, I mean, Heathcliff didn't have any money. Heathcliff didn't have any means to really make any money. And because of the fact that he wasn't white, you know, he didn't have he wasn't a great prospective suitor for her.
Yeah.
And so while she's being horribly selfish and what we would consider to just be like kind of a terrible person for just marrying Edgar, she was doing it because that's how the only way she's going to be able to survive.
And she's 15 when she makes this decision, too.
Right.
Like,
I was a horrible person when I was 15.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, if I had to make decisions when I was 15 about who I was going to marry, I'd be very unhappy right now. If I was even alive, because these people all died when they were like 12, so...
Yeah.
Well, not 12, clearly, since they're making decisions. But yeah, when they're in their like 20s, they're like, they just give up and fall over and die.
Pretty much, it kind of seems like they do just give up, don't they? They're kind of just like, oh, now it's my time to die. Caught the cold.
Gotta go. And Catherine especially, because she's like, "I'm gonna get sick, I promise." And then she does, and she does.
Yeah, and they just like, they stop eating, and they're like, "Oh, I died." And it's like, yeah, you did. Like, what'd you expect?
It's kind of talked about, too, because after Heathcliff runs off, because he hears her whole speech about how her love for Linton is changing, and her love for Heathcliff is like the eternal rocks beneath. She's a beautiful speech.
Oh, my God, those quotes made my entire high school. Like, they are what I mean?
No, I know. And I
His
just
and
feel
mine,
like,
their souls. Oh, my gosh, I can't.
This book shouldn't be read by emotional young women.
No,
because
no.
I know, yeah. Like the first time I read it, I was like, "This is what love is."
It sets you up for some bad relationships in the future.
Really.
Oh my God, this explains so much.
Everything, doesn't it? It explains everything.
It's just like, why am I so into forbidden love?
And I like too that your date, marry, kill is the same as mine, because then I'm like, yeah, no, this is probably explains like, if I'm picking Hindley today, that's probably like
You know, well, anything but Edgar. Like, really.
He's really terrible. So, but yeah, so she's making these choices at 15. Obviously, now there's going to be some effect as far as money goes. Okay, so that's all in the past. But do you think that people, on some level, still do that today? Where they...
Totally.
Yeah, okay.
No, I absolutely think that. I think people are faced with that type of thing all the time, and they can choose to be with somebody who really gets them, or they can choose to be with somebody. For some reason, it's like one or the other. Like, you're never finding someone right in the middle that's like, oh, we're greatly in love, and you're super successful, and, like, have lots of money.
We're both super successful.
Wow, yeah, right? It's just, it doesn't seem to be the way the world works. Do you think
that's, like, a thing where, like, super successful guys are like, oh, you know what? I'll just pick some girl that I think is cool or really pretty. I don't know, because like you never see like super power. Well, maybe Beyonce and Jay-Z.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's it. That's the power couple.
Yeah,
that's the one to beat.
All right, I don't think I can do it.
Yeah, I just haven't had enough gold albums by this time. If I was going to go Beyonce, I should have started like a long time ago.
Way better dance moves.
Yeah, that's all that's separating you and Beyonce.
It really is. I mean, we had the exact same physique, don't you know? So I just need to work on the dance moves at this point.
Just getting the dance moves and the songs, the better songs. 'Cause my songwriter isn't as good. So, but yeah, no. So, can true love exist outside of like some kind of bubble? Or do we have to bubble? Do we have to create a bubble for ourselves for true love to exist?
What do you mean by a bubble?
I mean, like, without societal pressures, you have to, like, go off and live in Plato's cave, essentially, for love to be real.
I like your Plato reference.
Yeah.
God, that's really tough for me to answer because I haven't had much luck with However, I found when I do go into caves, it works out quite well. Yeah. So, you know, I don't think it's... I think you just have to find the right person. And you know, Heathcliff, not the right person for Catherine, probably. You know what I mean? I think they sort of make each other crazy. And I don't think that's necessarily...
Could you imagine them having kids together?
No.
Oh, my God.
Their kids would be so moody. Oh, my God.
It totally screwed up because their parents would be running off all over the moors all the time.
Right? They would probably be nomadic and just, like...
The kids, you just
follow them around.
Child Protective Services.
I was just about to say, like, DPS is going to be called, like...
Yeah, there was no Child Protective Services back in the day, which is why Linton was so pathetic and Harriton was just deserted, essentially.
Yeah, it was just, like, thrown over a balcony and...
Yeah. And no one thought to call anybody.
Yeah,
there was no service.
It's not a big deal.
And because his dad was kind of rich, it was like, cool.
Kinda,
basically...
Kind of rich, kind of drunk.
Henley, basically Michael Jackson, the baby. Like,
oh my God, that's such a good description of Henley.
Of Henley, if we were making references to things that happened in the 90s, that would be the one.
Yep, it would be perfect.
Yeah, cool. So, what do you make of Catherine's choices? We talk kind of what would you choose?
I think she made the wrong choice. I think that...
What's her other option?
I think she could have gone with the person she was in love with. She could have tried to make it work. Clearly, homeboy was capable of making some money. Yeah. She just didn't believe in him. So, should have cared for him a little bit more. No, but I mean, I think ultimately she was afraid that she was making the wrong decision and was just basing something off of her heart. And I think that people kind of poo-poo that.
Well, making decisions
based off of your emotions versus based off of what could actually potentially have like monetary gain for you in the long run. It's like making the safe decision is going with Edgar. It would have been a risk to marry Heathcliff.
But that's more emotional to me, like to be like, yes, no, I'm throwing myself on the altar of love.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. But I feel like people shun your choices when they're based purely on emotion and not being more sensible. I feel like Edgar is the more sensible to societal norms type of decision.
But they don't really know anyone else. Like
there are no other people.
Yeah,
it's a giant bubble. Like
that's
it's
one
crazy.
thing that I think about when I think about this book. Like she really could have done whatever she wanted because there doesn't appear to be anyone like.
Right. She knows like 6 people total.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that's something that's very telling. Like the book focuses on like these 4 people: Hindley, Heathcliff, Edgar. Well, 5. Yeah, whatever. It focuses on like 6 people.
Yeah,
You're right.
There are not many people.
It's basically like if you need to cast the movie version of this book, you have to hire every actor in England. That covers it. But yeah, so there's like 6 people in this bubble. But one thing I find very interesting is that everyone who's not really talked about that much in the book seems to like Heathcliff an awful lot. So like there's like all these people and they're like, Heathcliff. But then if you go to Gimmerton, they're like, yeah, he seems like an okay guy. Like,
Yeah.
no one's ever talking smack about Heathcliff. Like when the lawyer comes to change the will for Edgar, first he goes to Heathcliff's house because he likes Heathcliff more. And then Kenneth is a doctor and he likes Heathcliff. And Joseph the servant doesn't seem to have too much of a problem with
he
Heathcliff.
seems to treat his the servants okay.
Yeah, because he could have fired Nellie.
Right.
I would have fired Nellie.
I totally would have fired Nellie. She's terrible.
She's the worst. She lies a lot, and she's always meddling.
Very meddly.
Constantly. It's like...
I don't think she's very good at her job.
No, you never hear about her actually working, is the
No.
thing. Like, she's always like, and then I went and told on Kathy about all the love
Writing
letters.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, what are your actual duties here?
Let's see a job description, Nellie.
She's
Because
basically...
I think you're falling short.
She's basically like Bartleby the Scrivener. She just shows up and never leaves. And they have to like she was born there, so now she's never gonna leave the area. But no one else seems to hate Heathcliff. Everyone seems to like him. Hareton likes him. And so I think that's really weird to me that Catherine made the choice that she did, somehow assuming that it would raise her in the estimation of like 2 people when there's like a whole town that's like, no, Heathcliff's a cool guy.
Yeah. I think she could have done it.
Yeah. But then who knows? Then he wouldn't have gone off and then he wouldn't have made his fortune, would he? Maybe he would.
Maybe. Who knows? Who knows what he's capable of doing? Maybe he's like awesome at crafting or something. That's how he made his millions.
He just like, he made a whole bunch of like scarves.
Lanyards, something like that.
What do you think he really did?
I don't know. I have no idea what Heathcliff did.
No one talks about it.
They don't really talk about his skills that much, though.
Well, working in fields.
I mean, sure, other than being like a slave.
Dashing his head against rocks.
Etc.
Loving passionately. These things all come in really handy in the real world.
Who knows where the... Yeah, okay, so let's take those 3 skills and see what that adds up to.
You can be unemployed. And, yeah, well, I mean, he essentially is. There's kind of some implications that he did go into the military because he comes back and he walks more erect. And that's basically the only thing they say. They're like, he walks more erect.
I was like, where are you getting this from? That's really interesting.
There's like, that's like the one thing.
Well, and you make bank back in the day.
Oh, yeah. That's how, remember, you read Jane Austen? Do you read?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, that's how Captain, Anne's guy, Captain Frederick. Captain Wentworth. That's how he made his money. Because his first name's Frederick. Sorry. Yeah. That's how he made a lot of money. So apparently...
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, like basically they would go off and plunder and then get the riches from plundering.
Plundering. That's totally how Heathcliff made his fortune.
It makes sense. It's either that or he went back to Asia and because he could, he fit in. That's what I always think. Like he went somewhere where he fit in.
Sure.
Right.
It would be a long trip, though.
Well, he's gone for like 3 years.
He is gone for 3 years, but that's a short period of time to make a fortune.
Well, I guess you're right. In like the 1780s, that is kind of a short time to go. Okay, he plundered something.
There was some plundering going on.
Yeah, something tells me that Emily Bronte wasn't too aware of how people made genetics and how people make money are 2 things she's not.
Kind of out of her scope.
Yep. So, that's our show for today. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me on to discuss my favorite book.
Thank you. Is there anything else you want to say about the book that you really...
No, I just took a bunch of notes on all this stuff, and I love this book. I think it's so crazy funny how it relates to crazy teenage girls. Like, I was just the craziest, and I was just so obsessed with this book, and like it totally shaped how I see the world. So
it's really good for teenage girls because I feel like you can't read it without like a lot of crying being involved.
And like you completely put yourself in that book, and it becomes the characters in your life.
Oh yeah, because it makes sense. It makes sense in high school.
Yeah.
Did you ever see, oh, and this is a good one, there's a MTV remake of it, like a modern, updated version?
No.
I think it came out in the early 2000s, but it stars, like, okay, so the Osbournes, like Sharon and Ozzy, they have the two, Kelly and
Jack.
But there's an older one, Amy, who was never on, like, the Osbourne show.
Oh, okay.
And she's in it.
Weird.
Yeah, and then... she has like a minor role in it, but then like the guy who plays Heathcliff is a rock star who like does a lot of drugs, and he's just so self-destructive and like.
I bet he's a writer.
Oh my god, it's so good. No, it was actually a very terrible.
I'm gonna have to check that out.
Adaptation. There's actually books, Wuthering Heights, with like the MTV book cover with the cast on it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I feel like I should
That's
go find
so
one of
sad.
those. It's amazing. Yeah, so Wuthering Heights, it is a perfect teenage book. And I think that's our show for today. So just once again, you can find us at facebook.com/Bibliophilia podcast. You can find us. Ooh, we got an Instagram, which is Bibliophilia podcast. And that's a lot of fun because people really like pictures of books. If you're into pictures of books, that's the one to follow. We've got a Tumblr, which is Bibliophilia podcast. And we've got a Twitter, which is Bibliophilia Pod, and I'm really not the greatest at tweeting, but I try. And you can reach us anytime at bibliophiliapodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. Oh, and as always, our theme music is by Joseph Scardetta, and it's going to play now. Soon. It's going to play soon. In like a second, it'll play.
2 seconds.
There it goes. It's a great song.